I woke up inside a BL novel, as the villain's second alpha who was supposed to die in the original story. I harassed the Omega male lead, got thrown into prison by the main alpha, and ended my life alone. So this time, I had only one rule: stay away from them. But the story I remembered was wrong. The Omega male lead? He was actually an alpha. The alpha male lead? Still an alpha. And me, the villain's second alpha I transmigrated into. I was never an alpha at all. And by the time I found out the truth, it was already too late. Because the two male leads had already decided they were never letting me go. The first thing I felt was pain. Not the vague, dull kind, no. This one came down like a steel rod behind my eyes, splitting my skull open from the inside. My stomach rolled. My mouth tasted like old whiskey and blood. Light stabbed through my eyelids hard enough to make me want to die before I even opened them. A deep, irritated voice cut through the pounding in my head. "Young master? Are you finally awake, young master?" I frowned. Then I regretted moving, because the room lurched so violently I almost threw up. The mattress under me was too soft. The sheets were too smooth. The air smelled expensive: cedarwood, leather, fresh linen, and something faintly bitter underneath, like the ghost of alcohol clinging to crystal. I forced my eyes open. A chandelier hung above me. Not just any chandelier, the kind rich people bought because they needed strangers to know they had generational wealth and emotional issues. I blinked once, twice, then sat up too fast and nearly blacked out. "Sir." A man in a black suit stepped forward, looking exactly like the sort of personal assistant who had spent years silently judging his employer's terrible life choices. I stared at him. He stared back. I looked around the room again. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Dark marble. A bedroom the size of a small apartment. A city skyline beyond the glass. No posters, no charger tangled by the bed. No pile of unfolded clothes on a chair. No sign of my real life at all. My chest tightened. "Where am I?" I croaked. The man's expression shifted very slightly. Concern, maybe. Or maybe he was just deciding whether I'd finally gone insane. "Your penthouse, young master." My skin went cold. Penthouse. Young master. The headache, the strange room, the expensive scent in the air, and then my eyes landed on the mirror across the room. I didn't remember getting out of bed. One second I was sitting there frozen. The next I was standing in front of the mirror with my pulse hammering against my throat. A stranger stared back at me. Tall, broad shoulders, black silk sleep shirt hanging open at the throat. Pale skin, sharp jaw, dark hair falling over cold. Handsome features I recognized so instantly my knees almost gave out. No, 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 no. I knew that face. I knew it because I'd spent 3 straight nights hate-reading comments about him. Because every chapter discussion had the same reaction whenever he showed up. That psycho is finally here. My fingers gripped the marble edge of the dresser so hard my knuckles blanched. In the mirror, the stranger did the same. And that was when the truth hit me hard enough to split my world in half. "Asher Vance," I whispered. The assistant behind me stiffened. "Sir." I didn't hear him. I was too busy staring at the face of the man I absolutely, categorically did not want to be. Asher Vance. Second alpha male lead. Rich, heir, spoiled bastard. Public nuisance. Obsessive stalker. Certified disaster. And most importantly, dead. I hadn't even finished the novel. That was the part that made me want to start screaming. If I had to transmigrate into a story, the universe could at least have had the decency to throw me into one I'd actually completed. But no. Apparently I had died, or fainted, or cosmic glitched, or whatever the hell had happened, and woken up in the body of a man whose ending I knew just enough about to panic. I remembered the basics. The story centered around 2 male leads, Ronan Blackwood, the cold, untouchable alpha everyone was obsessed with, and Julian Ashford, the delicate, heartbreakingly beautiful Omega who had half the fictional population on their knees. And then there was Asher Vance, the trash fire orbiting them. The second male lead who never stood a chance. The one who kept chasing Julian with humiliating persistence, kept provoking Ronan like he had a death wish, and eventually managed to destroy his own life so thoroughly that even the readers stopped defending him. By the time I dropped the novel, I'd already read enough to know how Asher's arc ended. Not quickly, not mercifully. He got ruined, dragged through scandal, financially gutted, arrested, thrown into prison. And in the final update I'd seen before rage closing the app, someone in the comments had written, "Honestly, his ending is worse than death." I hadn't even gotten to the exact chapter, but I remembered enough. Prison, humiliation, harassment, a suicide note. I gripped the dresser harder. No, absolutely not. That was not going to be me. I had no intention of inheriting this lunatic's prison ending just because some cosmic system had decided to play a joke on me. I inhaled once, then again. Then I straightened slowly and looked at my reflection with the grave determination of a man trying not to have a full mental collapse before breakfast. Okay, fine. Think. I was in Asher's body. That was bad, but I wasn't dead yet. That was good. Asher's face still looked too healthy, too untouched, too early. That meant I had probably landed before everything went to hell. If I was lucky, I had time. And if I had time, then I could fix this. Not everything. I wasn't delusional, but enough to survive. I turned toward the assistant, who still stood there like he was debating whether to call an ambulance or a priest. "What's today?" He blinked. "Saturday, sir." I stared. He told me the date, and my stomach dropped. I knew that date, because it was the date of one of the novel's early social events. The one where Asher publicly embarrassed himself over Julian for the third time and nearly got into a fight with Ronan in front of half the city's elite. Perfect. So I had transmigrated directly into the body of a doomed idiot on the exact day he was supposed to start digging his own grave deeper. Amazing. Incredible. I love this for me. I dragged a hand down my face and forced myself not to start pacing. This wasn't unsalvageable. I just needed rules. Simple rules. Rules kept people alive. I looked at myself in the mirror again and said them under my breath like a prayer. Rule 1. Stay away from Julian Ashford. Rule 2. Do not provoke Ronan Blackwood. Rule 3. Do not commit crimes. Rule 4. Do not go to prison. Rule 5. Stay alive. I nodded once. Yes. Good. Solid. Very survival-oriented. The assistant cleared his throat. "Sir, should I assume you still intend to attend tonight's banquet?" I looked at him, then at my reflection, then back at him. "Do I have to?" His expression said unfortunately yes. Wonderful. I had been in this body for less than 20 minutes, and the plot was already waiting outside my front door with a baseball bat. 3 hours later, I was being dressed for war. Or, apparently, a charity gala, which in this city was basically the same thing. The stylists moved around me like nervous birds while I sat in front of a mirror, trying not to dissociate. Someone adjusted the cuffs of my black suit. Someone else fixed my hair. A third person hovered nearby with a tray of cufflinks that probably cost more than my entire real-life rent. Asher Vance's face stared back at me from the mirror. Sharp and expensive, and entirely too dangerous looking for a man currently one inconvenience away from a breakdown. I looked like the kind of person who ruined lives for sport. I felt like a customer service employee trapped in a murder mystery. The assistant, whose name I had learned was Pierce, stood by the door with the expression of a man who had accepted that his employer was going to behave unpredictably tonight and was already pre-tired about it. "Young master," he said carefully, "if I may, perhaps tonight would be a good opportunity to keep a lower profile." I turned to look at him. He looked back with professional neutrality. Then, after a beat, he added, "A much lower profile." I narrowed my eyes. Was original me really that bad? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. That was answer enough. I sighed. "Don't worry. I'm not causing trouble tonight. Pierce hesitated. Should I take that as reassurance? Yes. That concerns me. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I stood, adjusted my cuffs, and stared at myself one last time. This was it. Step 1 of Operation Don't Die. Go to the event. Avoid Julian. Avoid Ronan. Leave with my dignity and legal freedom intact. Easy. Simple. Completely achievable. I should have known it would all start falling apart the second I walked in. The banquet hall looked like wealth had exploded and nobody had bothered to clean it up. Crystal chandeliers, gold accents, tall windows draped in midnight silk. A string quartet in one corner. Waiters gliding through the crowd with silver trays and expensive indifference. The entire upper tier of the city's business, political, and social circles gathered under one roof to drink, gossip, and destroy each other politely. The moment I stepped inside, I felt it. Heads turned. Not subtly, not kindly. Asher Vance apparently had a reputation strong enough to make people track his location like weather. Whispers moved through the room in little ripples, some curious, some amused, some already bracing for impact. Fantastic. I smiled thinly and took a champagne flute from a passing tray, just so I'd have something to do with my hands. Then I made the mistake of looking across the room and saw him, Julian Ashford. For one stupid second, I forgot how to breathe. He was standing beneath one of the chandeliers in a fitted ivory suit that made him look less like a person and more like an unfairly beautiful problem the gods had dropped into society for entertainment. Soft dark hair brushed his forehead. His profile was elegant enough to make people stupid, delicate, refined, calm. He looked exactly like the kind of man novels ruined entire cities over. And beside him, black suit, broad shoulders, a face carved from ice and old money, stood Ronan Blackwood. Even from across the room, he carried the kind of presence that made the air feel narrower. He wasn't smiling, wasn't doing anything obvious at all, actually. And yet the people around him still kept a respectful distance, like instinct had quietly informed them he was not to be tested. Both of them together. Of course. Because apparently the universe wanted me dead on sight. I looked away immediately. Nope. Absolutely not. I was not doing this tonight. I turned on my heel and started walking in the exact opposite direction, smoothly, calmly, dignified, like a man with no history of public obsession and absolutely no intention of relapsing into fictional self-destruction. 3 steps later, I heard someone say too loudly, "Looks like Vance spotted Ashford." Another voice laughed. "Here we go. I wanted to die. Not metaphorically. Just fold me into the nearest decorative curtain and let me evaporate." I kept walking. Did not look back. Did not flinch. Did not engage. And that, apparently, was the first truly shocking thing Asher Vance had ever done in public. The room changed. It was subtle, but I felt it. The expectation cracked. The silence behind me sharpened, like an audience had leaned forward because the actor on stage had just skipped a line everyone thought they knew by heart. I made it all the way to the drinks table before I exhaled. Good. Great. Perfect. See, this was working. I took a slow sip of champagne and mentally congratulated myself on not humiliating my borrowed body in front of half the city. Then a voice at my shoulder said, very softly, "You didn't come over." I nearly swallowed glass. I turned. Julian Ashford stood beside me. Up close, he was worse. Beautiful in the kind of precise, polished way that made you instinctively suspicious of your own judgment. His eyes were dark and cool and fixed on me with unnerving patience. He smelled expensive, too. Something clean and subtle and hard to place. Not sweet, not soft, just sharp enough to make me feel like I was missing something. I forced my expression into something neutral. Should I have? Julian tilted his head. There was no warmth in his smile when it came. Usually, yes. Right. Because usually Asher was a relentless embarrassment with no concept of shame or survival. I took another measured sip of champagne. Then perhaps tonight is a refreshing change. His gaze sharpened. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I could feel people watching. Of course they were. This city would probably live stream a rich man's emotional collapse if given enough canapes and legal immunity. Julian stepped a little closer, not enough to be obvious, enough to be deliberate. Are you feeling unwell, Asher? I hated how naturally he said my name. Like silk over a blade. No, just strange. His eyes moved over my face with cool, clinical interest. You're behaving like someone else. My grip tightened around the stem of my glass. Well, that was rude. Also alarmingly accurate. I smiled anyway. And you're staring like you missed the attention. For the first time, something flickered in his expression. Not anger, not embarrassment, interest. Wrong answer. Very wrong answer. Julian's mouth curved just slightly. Do I? I wouldn't know, I said. I've recently recovered my self-respect. A silence dropped between us. Then Julian laughed, actually laughed. Soft, brief, real enough to make my skin prickle. That, more than anything else, made me uneasy. Because I had the horrible feeling I had just done something catastrophically stupid without understanding why yet. I glanced over his shoulder and locked eyes with Ronan Blackwood. He was standing exactly where he'd been before, watching us. No expression. No visible reaction, just those dark, unreadable eyes fixed on me with the kind of stillness that made the back of my neck tighten. I looked away first, because I believed in survival. If you'll excuse me, I said, already stepping back. Julian didn't stop me. That should have reassured me. Instead, it felt like being released on purpose. Of course, he said. Then, just before I could move past him, he added in a voice only I could hear. Now I'm curious. My stomach sank. Oh no. No. Curiosity was bad. Curiosity got people dissected in laboratories and stalked in dark romance novels. I gave him a tight smile and walked away without answering. Not too fast, not panicked. Just briskly enough to communicate I respect myself, and also I would like to leave this fictional hellscape immediately. I made it all the way to the far side of the ballroom before my pulse slowed. Bad start. Very bad start. But not unrecoverable. Julian was interested. That was unfortunate. Ronan had noticed. That was worse. Still, I could fix this. I just had to keep my head down for the rest of the evening and avoid doing anything plot relevant. Which was exactly when I overheard two men discussing Ronan Blackwood's company and the phrase, once he signs tonight, he's finished. I stopped walking, because apparently self-preservation was no match for a catastrophic lack of self-control. The voices came from a half-shadowed corridor beside the ballroom, where two men in expensive suits stood with the casual posture of people committing white-collar murder. I shouldn't have listened. I knew I shouldn't have listened. But one of them said Blackwood Holdings, and then offshore debt transfer, and then he won't catch it until the board meeting. And suddenly my memory kicked in like a slap. I knew this. Not clearly, not perfectly, but enough. A scene from the novel flashed through my head. Something about an early financial hit. A setup disguised as a partnership. Ronan losing a major asset because one of the contracts had been poisoned from the beginning. I hadn't paid much attention when I read it. I definitely hadn't expected it to become relevant to my personal continued existence. The men moved away before they noticed me. I stood there for one long, stupid second, then muttered, "Not my circus, not my psychopath," and started walking. 3 steps later, I stopped again. Here was the problem. If Ronan got hit tonight the way the original plot intended, it would push a whole chain of events forward, including several that ended very badly for Asher. Meaning this was technically self-defense. Very annoying self-defense. I hated that. I hated that I turned around. I hated even more that my feet kept moving until I found Ronan, standing near one of the side lounges, speaking quietly with a silver-haired board member. He noticed me before I reached him. Of course he did. The board member excused himself almost immediately, clearly deciding he did not want to be present for whatever social disaster Asher Vance was about to unleash. Reasonable. Ronan turned fully toward me. Up close, he was even more intimidating. Not because he was loud, because he wasn't. Everything about him was controlled. His posture, his expression, the line of his shoulders, the quiet force sitting beneath his skin like a locked weapon. I stopped a few feet away, and for the first time that night, I almost wished I'd rather dealt with Julian. Almost. Ronan looked at me without speaking. I looked back and immediately remembered why original Asher had probably made so many bad decisions. Being stared at by this man felt like being held in place by a blade. I cleared my throat. You're about to sign something tonight, right? One dark eyebrow lifted. That's an unusual opening. Please focus. A beat. Then, coolly, why? Because I'm trapped in a death flag novel and trying not to get psychologically flayed by the narrative, that's why. Because if you sign whatever deal they put in front of you, I said under my breath, you should probably read the offshore transfer clause twice. Silence. The noise of the ballroom carried faintly from the next room. Ronan didn't move, didn't blink, didn't react at all, actually, which somehow made it worse. Then he said, "Who told you that?" Excellent question. I smiled with the brittle confidence of a man one sentence away from making everything worse. Call it a rare moment of public service. Ronan's gaze sharpened almost imperceptibly. Asher Vance and public service are not known acquaintances. Fair. Very fair. I took a step back. Well, enjoy the novelty. Then I turned and started walking before he could ask anything else, because if I stayed another 10 seconds, I was going to either confess transmigration or pass out from stress. I made it halfway down the corridor before his voice stopped me. Asher. I froze. Did not turn around. Did not breathe. His footsteps were soundless on the polished floor. When he stopped behind me, I could feel the weight of his presence like heat at my back. Too close. Way too close. If this is some kind of game, he said quietly, you should reconsider playing it with me. My spine went rigid. There was no anger in his tone, no threat sharpened for display. Just certainty, the kind that made men disappear and companies collapse. I swallowed once and forced myself to look over my shoulder. His face was unreadable. His eyes were not. They were fixed on me with a focus that made my pulse trip hard enough to hurt. It's not a game, I said. For one suspended second, something passed between us, suspicion, calculation, recognition of something broken in the script. Then I looked away first, because again, I believed in survival. Good night, Mr. Blackwood. And this time, I did not stop walking. I should have left immediately after that. I knew I should have. But social events had rules, and apparently one of them was that rich people couldn't leave a banquet before dessert without causing rumors, which was frankly one of the stupidest things I had learned since waking up here. So I stayed. I smiled when required, ignored when possible, avoided Julian successfully for exactly 42 minutes. And then he cornered me on a balcony. Cold night air hit my face the second the glass doors slid shut behind us. The city glittered below like a threat. I turned and found Julian leaning against the railing, hands in his pockets, looking entirely too composed for someone who had clearly followed me out here on purpose. I exhaled through my nose. Do either of you believe in personal space? No, he said lightly. At least he was honest. I folded my arms. What do you want? Julian studied me for a moment, the night wind stirring the edge of his dark hair. Then he asked, very quietly, why did you stop chasing me? There it was. The question, not flirtatious this time, not mocking either. Genuine. And somehow that made it harder. I looked away toward the city lights. Because what was I supposed to say? Because the version of you in the novel helped ruin this body's life, and I would rather throw myself into traffic than die over a fictional love triangle? Probably not ideal. So I said the closest thing to the truth I could manage. Because I got tired. Julian's expression shifted just slightly. Of me. Of being pathetic. That landed harder than I intended. I saw it in the stillness that came over him. The way his fingers tightened once against the railing, then loosened. His gaze didn't leave my face. And now, he asked. I laughed under my breath. Now I'd like one peaceful week where nobody in this city makes my future look like a legal documentary. Julian stared at me. Then, slowly, he pushed off the railing and stepped closer. One step, then another, until there was very little space left between us. I held my ground. Mostly because my legs had forgotten how movement worked. Up close, his eyes were colder than they looked from a distance, sharper, too. Aware. You really are different tonight, he murmured. My throat tightened. I'm developing depth. A faint smile touched his mouth. How inconvenient. Before I could ask what that meant, Julian reached up and adjusted my tie, slowly. His fingers brushed the side of my throat. A tiny, unnecessary touch. It hit me like a live wire. I went still. Every muscle, every thought. The night air suddenly felt too thin. Julian's gaze dropped briefly to my mouth, then rose again. His voice was almost gentle when he said, "Be careful, Asher." I frowned. Why? He smiled. And somehow that was the worst possible answer, because now he said softly, "I'm curious." Then he stepped back, turned, and left me standing alone on the balcony with my pulse kicking like a trapped animal against my ribs. By the time I finally got home, my shoulders ached from tension and my head was throbbing again. I kicked off my shoes the second I entered the penthouse and loosened my tie like it had personally betrayed me. Pierce appeared with the silent efficiency of a man who had probably been waiting to confirm whether his employer had survived the evening without setting anything on fire. "How was the banquet, sir?" "Traumatizing." He nodded once. "I see. No, you really don't." I poured water instead of whiskey, which felt like visible character growth, then leaned both hands on the counter and stared at the city lights beyond the glass. Okay. Assessment. Had I publicly embarrassed myself? No. Had I thrown myself at Julian? No. Had I picked a fight with Ronan? No. Had I, against all common sense, inserted myself into what was probably a high-stakes corporate sabotage plot involving one of the most dangerous men in the city? Unfortunately, yes. Still, overall, not catastrophic. Maybe. Probably. I drank half the glass in one go and told myself I was fine. Totally fine. Completely in control. Then my phone buzzed on the marble counter. I looked down and nearly dropped the glass. There was only one message. From an unknown number. "You've changed." No signature. No explanation. Just that. Cold moved through me in a slow, unpleasant wave. Because there were only two people tonight who could have sent that. And somehow, terrifyingly, I wasn't sure which one would be worse. I stared at the screen, then at the city, then back at the message. My pulse started climbing all over again. Somewhere out there, one of the male leads had started paying attention. And deep in my bones, I already knew the truth. Tonight, I hadn't escaped the plot. I had stepped directly into it. The universe responded by kicking my front door in the next morning. Not literally. That would have been at least honest. No, instead, Pierce entered the breakfast room with the stiff expression of a man carrying bad news wrapped in expensive stationery. I was halfway through coffee and trying to remember whether Asher Vance had any legal obligations I should know about when Pierce placed a cream-colored envelope beside my plate. I stared at it, then at him, then back at the envelope. "What is that?" "An invitation, sir." "I can see that. Why are you saying it like someone died?" Pierce's expression remained professionally blank. "Because it is from the Ashford family." I stopped moving. The coffee cup hovered halfway to my mouth. No, thank you." I set it down carefully. "Why, young master?" "Julian Ashford is hosting a private luncheon tomorrow." My entire soul recoiled. And why, exactly, would I be invited to that? Pierce gave me a look that suggested I was asking the wrong question. Perhaps, he said delicately, because young Master Julian has taken an interest in your recent behavioral shift. I leaned back in my chair. Wonderful. Amazing. I loved being studied like a suspicious zoo animal. Decline it. Sir. Decline it. Pierce did not move. That was never a good sign. The invitation has already been publicly acknowledged. I stared at him. What does that mean? It means, sir, that if you refuse now, it will be taken as a deliberate insult. I closed my eyes. Of course it would. Because this city apparently ran on money, scandal, and emotionally loaded lunch plans. Fine, I muttered. I'll go. Very good, sir. If I die there, tell people I hated all of them. I'll prepare a tasteful statement. I looked at him. He looked back. I wasn't entirely sure he was joking. Ashford House was aggressively elegant, the kind of mansion that looked like old money had developed sentience. Dark polished wood, white marble floors, black iron railings, floor-to-ceiling windows that poured winter light into rooms too quiet to trust. Everything was tasteful. Everything was expensive. Everything felt curated, like a place designed to impress and suffocate in equal measure. A maid led me through the entrance hall and into a sunlit glass conservatory at the back of the estate. Julian was already there. Of course he was. He stood near the long luncheon table with one hand in his pocket, dressed in a cream knit and dark slacks, looking unfairly soft and expensive and entirely too pleased to see me, which was disturbing because it implied he had expected me to come. And somehow that felt more dangerous than if he'd doubted it. Asher. His voice carried low and smooth through the conservatory. Warm glass walls, winter light, white roses climbing trellises. A perfect setting for murder or emotional manipulation. I stopped a few feet away. You sent flowers like a Victorian threat. Julian smiled. And yet you still came. That says more about my social obligations than your charm. Does it? He stepped closer, not enough to be indecent, enough to be deliberate. His eyes flicked briefly over my face, then down the line of my throat, like he was checking for evidence of something only he understood. That did not help my blood pressure. You look tired, he murmured. You text like a sleep disorder. That laugh again, low, brief, dangerous. Julian gestured toward the table. Sit. I looked at him, then at the table, then back at him. You phrase things like a kidnapper. And yet, he said, you're still here. I hated how often that line worked. The luncheon itself should have been civilized, elegant table setting, silver cutlery, fine china, delicate dishes arranged like edible architecture. Instead, it felt like a hostage negotiation with excellent plating. Julian sat across from me at first, watching me with that same unreadable, focused interest that kept making my skin feel too tight. It got worse when the servants left us alone. Silence settled over the conservatory, the kind that forced awareness into every tiny movement. The scrape of cutlery, the lift of his glass, the way his eyes stayed on me too long whenever I looked up. Finally, I put my fork down. Are you planning to eat, or just study me until I develop a stress-related illness? Julian smiled faintly. Can I not do both? No. I narrowed my eyes. What do you want from me? The question landed between us and stayed there. Julian leaned back slightly in his chair. For once, he didn't answer immediately. When he finally did, his voice was quieter, more honest, which somehow made it worse. I'm trying to understand you. Bad hobby. You were obsessed with me before. Now you're confused. That's not an upgrade. Julian's gaze sharpened. And now, I held his eyes. Because if there was one thing I had learned quickly in this world, it was that showing weakness around these men was how you ended up metaphorically, or literally, cornered. Now I think you're exhausting. His expression didn't change, but his fingers tightened once around the stem of his glass, a tiny movement, easy to miss. I didn't. Good. Let him suffer just a little. Then Julian smiled again. And that was worse, because it meant he had liked the answer. You keep trying to push me away, he said softly. That's called instinct. No, he said, eyes on mine. That's called fear. I laughed once under my breath. You're not that special. No. He stood and crossed the space between us, stopping beside my chair. Too close again. Always too close. My shoulders tightened. Julian looked down at me with the kind of calm attention that made me feel pinned without a single hand on me. Then why? He murmured. Do you keep reacting like I might do something to you? Because you might. Because I still didn't know what you actually were. Because every instinct I had kept screaming that the novel had gotten you wrong. I leaned back slightly. A mistake, because it only made him angle closer. Maybe, I said evenly, because you enjoy standing over people like a villain in a perfume commercial. Julian's mouth twitched. Then his hand lifted, and before I could stop him, his fingers brushed lightly against my jaw. Not enough to hold, enough to make me freeze. The conservatory went silent around us. His touch was warm, controlled, deliberate in a way that sent awareness flashing under my skin like lit wire. You're trembling, he said softly. I hated that he was right. Worse, I hated that I wasn't trembling from fear alone. Move, I said. His thumb shifted once, barely, against the line of my jaw. My pulse kicked hard enough to make me angry. Make me, Julian whispered. The room dropped. Every nerve in my body tightened at once. I stared up at him, at the quiet challenge in his eyes, at the strange, dangerous patience in the way he was waiting. And then a voice cut cleanly through the moment. You always did have terrible timing. Julian stepped back immediately. I turned so fast my chair scraped the floor. Ronan Blackwood stood at the conservatory entrance. No coat, dark suit, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. He looked like he belonged there, which, judging by Julian's face, meant this was not a surprise visit. I stared between them, then sat up straighter. Why are you here? Ronan's gaze rested on me for half a second too long. Business. Julian folded his arms. And a control issue. Ronan ignored him. Of course he did. That seemed to be one of his hobbies. I looked at Julian, then at Ronan, then at the untouched dessert in front of me, and finally said the only reasonable thing available. Am I at lunch or in the middle of a custody dispute? Julian laughed, actually laughed. Ronan's mouth almost moved again. Almost. I was starting to resent how much satisfaction I got from nearly making him smile. That felt like a future problem. Julian leaned one hip against the edge of the table and looked at me with open amusement. Now you're in my house, he said. Ronan walked into the conservatory, unhurried, controlled, terrible for my nervous system. And yet, he said coolly, you look uncomfortable. I blinked. Excuse me. Anxious, Ronan clarified. You've been gripping your fork for the last 3 minutes like you're preparing to use it as a weapon. I looked down. I had, in fact, been gripping my fork like I was preparing to use it as a weapon. I set it down slowly. You're very observant, I said flatly. I'm very concerned. That landed harder than it should have. Julian's expression cooled. He was fine, Julian said. He was cornered. The words hit differently. A sharp silence followed. I looked between them again, slowly, because something had just shifted, not in the room, in my head. A memory, a detail from the novel I had dismissed at the time because it had seemed irrelevant. There had been a recurring comment thread under the chapters. Readers arguing, some insisting Julian didn't feel like an Omega, others saying the author had written him too dominant. At the time, I'd ignored it because comment sections were usually where media literacy went to die. But now Julian was standing in front of me with all the polished beauty of a perfect Omega male lead and absolutely none of the underlying softness that role was supposed to carry in this world. And Ronan was watching him with the kind of weariness people didn't waste on prey. My spine went cold. No, wait. Hold on. Something in the story was wrong. Not metaphorically wrong, factually wrong. I looked at Julian again. Really looked. The stillness in him. The way he occupied space. The confidence that had nothing to do with prettiness and everything to do with dominance, disguised as elegance. Then I thought about his scent. Not sweet. Never sweet. Never once had he smelled like what this world expected an Omega to smell like. And suddenly, violently, the pieces slammed together in my head. I went still. Julian noticed immediately. Of course he did. His eyes narrowed slightly. What? I looked at him, then at Ronan, then back at Julian, and said, before common sense could stop me, "You're not what you're supposed to be." Silence. Absolute silence. Julian's face changed. Not dramatically, worse. It emptied. All softness gone. All light amusement gone. What remained beneath it was colder, older, dangerous enough to make my entire body lock. Ronan's gaze snapped to me, sharp and alert. "Asher," he said quietly. Too late. Way too late. Because Julian was looking at me now like I had just reached into his chest and put my hand around a secret he had killed to keep. I swallowed once. Julian took one step toward me. That was all one. But every instinct in my body screamed. Not because he looked angry, because he didn't. He looked calm. And that was infinitely worse. "Say that again," he said softly. I stood too fast, my chair scraping hard against the floor. "I think I should go." Julian smiled. And it was the most dangerous expression I had seen on his face yet. Not because it was cruel, because it wasn't. It was patient, like he had just discovered something worth taking apart slowly. "Now," he said, voice low and smooth, "I'm absolutely certain you've been hiding things from me." My heartbeat kicked hard enough to hurt. Ronan moved then, subtle, precise. He stepped just slightly into the line between us. Not fully. Enough. A warning without making it one. Julian's eyes flicked to him. The air in the conservatory changed. Heavy, sharp, invisible pressure building under the glass and winter light. And all at once, I understood something deeply, catastrophically important. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a love triangle. This was not even remotely the clean, dramatic romance plot I thought I'd transmigrated into. This story had been wrong from the beginning, and I was standing in the middle of secrets powerful enough to get me buried under the estate. I needed to leave immediately. "I just remembered," I said tightly, already reaching for my coat. "I have to go home and never speak again." Neither of them laughed. Bad sign. Very bad sign. Julian's gaze stayed fixed on me, unblinking, assessing, calculating. Ronan's jaw tightened. "Asher." "No," I said immediately. "No conversations. No revelations. No suspiciously intimate psychological warfare in botanical settings. I'm done for the day." I grabbed my coat and made for the exit. No one stopped me. That should have reassured me. Instead, it felt like being allowed to run, which, in fiction, was always when the hunting got worse. I made it to the car, then halfway home, and then my luck ran out. The driver pulled over at my request when I saw the pharmacy. I got out, bought a pregnancy test, because the nausea, the fatigue, the sensitivity to smells had been screaming at me for days, and I had been ignoring it like the champion of denial I was, and got back in. At the penthouse, I locked myself in the bathroom and stared at the little plastic stick for 3 minutes that felt like 3 years. 2 lines. Pregnant. My legs gave out. I slid down the bathroom wall and sat on the cold marble floor, staring at the test in my trembling hands. 6 weeks. The doctor would later confirm. 6 weeks. Which meant, I did the math, that night. The night of the banquet. The night my body had gone into that first terrifying heat. The night both of them had been there. The night my face burned. The night things had gotten out of control in a way I had been too overwhelmed to fully process. I was pregnant. With Julian's child? Ronan's? Both? I didn't know. And somehow, that was the least of my problems. Because the real problem was already knocking on my door. The intercom rang. Then again. Then a third time, not frantic, not impatient. Measured, deliberate, like the person on the other end knew I was spiraling and was enjoying the pacing of it. I dragged myself off the floor, stuffed the test into a drawer, and walked to the intercom on shaky legs. The lobby camera flickered to life. Julian and Ronan stood side by side in the private entrance lobby below. Dark coats, cold expressions, both looking up at the camera with the kind of synchronized menace that made my stomach drop straight through the floor. I stared at the screen, then at my phone, which was buzzing with messages from both of them. "Let us in. Don't make me break the door." I closed my eyes, counted to 3, and pressed the unlock button. They stepped off the elevator together, an image of coordinated disaster. Julian's usual elegance was sharper tonight, his eyes too bright, his smile too thin. Ronan was a wall of silence beside him, broad shoulders and cold fury held barely in check. I stood in the middle of my living room, arms crossed, heart pounding, and watched them enter like they already owned the space. No one spoke for a long, terrible moment. Then Julian said, softly, "You know, I didn't pretend to misunderstand. Yes, you've known for a while. Long enough to be terrified." My voice came out steadier than I felt. Long enough to understand that the novel, the one I thought I knew, was wrong about everything. Ronan moved first. He closed the distance between us in 3 strides, stopped just short of touching me, and looked down at me with those dark, unreadable eyes. "The novel," he repeated. "Don't." I held up a hand. "Don't start. I know this sounds insane. I know you have questions. But right now I need you to tell me one thing." He waited. "The fire at the banquet. The warning I gave you about the contract. The way I stopped chasing Julian. All of it. Did you think I was playing some kind of long game? Did you think I was manipulating you?" Ronan was silent for a beat. Then he said, "I thought you were someone else. Now I think you're someone I don't know at all. And that scares me more than any game ever could." Julian laughed, a short, sharp sound. "He's not a threat, Ronan. He's a liability. An omega liability." And apparently, his eyes dropped to my stomach. I hadn't told them yet, but Julian had always been too observant. "What?" I said, my voice cracking despite myself. Julian stepped closer. His hand reached out, not to touch, just to hover near my abdomen. "You're pregnant." It wasn't a question. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Ronan's gaze snapped down, then back to my face. Something in his expression shifted, cracked, reformed into something I couldn't name. Fiercer, more certain. "Mine?" he asked. "Ours," Julian said, and the word landed like a brand. I backed away until I hit the sofa. "Both of you stop. We don't know that. We don't know anything yet. I only just found out. I haven't even seen a doctor. I'll have my physician at the penthouse within the hour," Ronan said. "I'll arrange a private clinic," Julian countered. More discreet. "You're both impossible," I snapped. "I'm not a piece of property to be managed. I'm not a hostage. My voice broke. "I'm just someone who woke up in a nightmare and tried to survive it, and somehow, somewhere along the way, I stopped wanting to leave." The room went very quiet. Julian's expression softened, just a fraction, just enough to be devastating. "Then don't," he said quietly. "Stay." Ronan's hand found mine. His fingers were warm, steady. "Stay," he echoed. I looked at them, at the 2 men who were supposed to destroy me in the original story, at the 2 men who had, instead, become the only thing in this world that felt real. I didn't answer with words. I just held on tighter. The weeks that followed were chaos, beautiful, terrifying, overwhelming chaos. Julian's physician confirmed the pregnancy. Ronan's lawyer handled the legal formalities. The city gossiped. The pack elders objected. Neither of them cared. I spent my days between their homes. Julian's elegant conservatory, Ronan's stark penthouse, my own apartment that somehow became ours. They argued constantly about security, about schedules, about whose doctor was more qualified. They also watched me with the same unbearable intensity, touched me with the same careful reverence, and looked at each other with a rivalry that had softened into something almost like partnership. The novel's plot unraveled around us. Ronan dismantled the corporate conspiracy with the evidence I'd helped uncover. Julian exposed his family's schemes and claimed his place as the head of the Ashford pack. The ending I had feared never came, because I wasn't the villain anymore. I was the one they chose. Months later, after the chaos, after the confessions, after the bond that finally, irrevocably tied the three of us together, I stood on the balcony of our shared home, watching the city lights flicker below. Julian came up behind me, arms sliding around my waist. Ronan joined a moment later, a warm presence at my back. Still thinking about running away? Julian murmured against my ear. Every day, I said. And every day, I don't. Ronan's hand settled over my stomach, where our child moved beneath my skin. Good, he said. Because we're not letting you go. I leaned back against them, against the impossible, terrifying, wonderful weight of being loved by two men who should have been my destruction. And for the first time since waking up in this world, I smiled, really smiled, and meant it. This is insane, I said. Probably, Julian agreed. Definitely, Ronan added. I closed my eyes and let the warmth of them surround me. But it's ours. And somehow that was enough. The first trimester was a nightmare. Not because of the pregnancy itself, though the nausea, the exhaustion, and the sudden, overwhelming aversion to the smell of coffee, which I had previously loved, were all deeply unpleasant. No, the nightmare was them. Julian and Ronan had apparently decided, independently and without consulting me, that I was now made of glass. Expensive, irreplaceable glass that might shatter if exposed to stress, stares, or the wrong brand of bottled water. You're hovering, I said flatly, not looking up from my laptop. Ronan was standing 3 feet away, pretending to read something on his phone. He had been standing there for 20 minutes. I'm not hovering. You're looming. There's a difference, and neither is welcome. He didn't move. Of course he didn't. Julian, from the kitchen island where he was examining a list of omega-safe prenatal supplements with the intensity of a man defusing a bomb, glanced over with a faint smile. Let him loom, darling. It's his love language. His love language is surveillance, I muttered. And don't call me darling. Sweetheart. Worse. Beloved. I threw a pillow at him. He caught it without looking. This was my life now. The second trimester was easier, physically at least. The nausea faded. My energy returned. My body began to change in ways that made me hyper-aware of the small life growing inside me. I caught myself resting a hand on my stomach without thinking, and when I realized what I was doing, I couldn't quite bring myself to stop. Julian noticed first, because Julian noticed everything. You're showing, he said one morning, watching me over the rim of his coffee cup. His voice was softer than usual, less sharp, less performative, almost reverent. I looked down at the small curve beneath my shirt. Barely counts. He set his cup down and crossed the room. His hand hovered near my stomach, waiting, actually waiting, for permission. I nodded once. His palms settled against the bump, warm and careful. His breath caught. There's something there, he whispered. That's usually how pregnancy works. Shut up. But he was smiling. A real smile, not the elegant, dangerous one he wore like armor. Something younger, more vulnerable. Hello in there, he said quietly. I'm your father. The better one. From the doorway, Ronan's voice. You're delusional. Julian didn't even look up. I'm first. You're persistent. There's a difference. I watched them. These two impossible, infuriating, terrifying men, and felt something warm and complicated unfurl in my chest. They still argued constantly. They still looked at each other like rivals waiting for the other to slip. But there was something new underneath it now. Something that looked almost like partnership. Or maybe they just didn't want to fight in front of the baby. Either way, I take it. The pack elders didn't approve. Of course they didn't. The news that Asher Vance, disgraced, volatile, socially radioactive Asher Vance, was pregnant with the heirs of two of the most powerful alpha families in the city had spread like wildfire. The gossip columns had a field day. The boardrooms were in chaos. And the elders of both the Ashford and Blackwood packs had convened separate and then joint emergency meetings to discuss the situation. I wasn't invited to any of them, which was fine. I would have hated every second. Julian returned from the first meeting with a smile that didn't reach his eyes and a bottle of wine he opened but didn't drink. They want a paternity test, he said. I was curled on the sofa, a blanket over my legs, one hand on my stomach. Let me guess, they're hoping it's not yours. They're hoping it's not either of ours. That would be easier to explain. He poured the wine, pushed the glass aside, and poured another. They don't like things they can't control. And a baby with two possible fathers, neither of whom is a conventional omega, is definitely something they can't control. Julian's smile sharpened. You're catching on. Ronan arrived an hour later, looking like he'd just been through a war. He didn't say anything about his own meeting. He just sat on the other end of the sofa, close enough that his shoulder brushed mine, and stared at the city lights for a long time. Finally, he said, I told them I'd burn the pack to the ground before I let them touch you. I blinked. That's extreme. That's accurate. Julian laughed, a short, surprised sound. Look at us. A hostage situation and two arsonists. The baby's going to have quite the inheritance. The tension in the room broke. Not completely, but enough. I leaned my head back against the sofa and looked at both of them. We're going to need a better plan than burn everything down. Ronan's jaw tightened. I don't have a better plan. I do, Julian said. We announced the bonding. Publicly. Formally. Before the next pack meeting. If we present a united front, both houses, both heirs, both claiming the child as ours, they can't move against us without destabilizing both packs simultaneously. They won't risk it. Ronan was quiet for a moment. Then, it could work. It will work. Julian's eyes met mine. But only if you're willing to be seen with us. Both of us. Publicly. Permanently. The weight of the question settled over me. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. This was about choosing, openly, irrevocably, to belong to them. I looked down at my stomach, at the small curve that held our future. Fine, I said. Let's tell the world. The announcement was made 3 days later. Not at a press conference. Neither Julian nor Ronan believed in those, but at a private gathering of both packs' senior members. The venue was neutral ground. A gallery space downtown, white walls and warm light, expensive champagne and colder stairs. I wore a dark gray suit tailored to accommodate the small swell of my pregnancy. Julian had chosen it, of course. Ronan had adjusted the cufflinks. You look like you're about to be executed, Julian murmured as we walked in. That's how I feel. Charming. Try to smile. It confuses people. Ronan was on my other side, a solid, silent presence. His hand found the small of my back and stayed there. A claim, a comfort, a warning all at once. The room went quiet when we entered. I felt the weight of every gaze, curiosity, disdain, calculation, a few flickers of something that might have been sympathy. The elders sat in a half-circle at the far end of the gallery, their expressions carefully neutral. We stopped in the center of the room. Julian spoke first, smooth, elegant, every word precise. Thank you for coming. I know this gathering is unconventional, but recent events require clarity, and clarity requires transparency. Someone in the back muttered. Julian ignored them. Asher Vance is my bonded mate. He is also Ronan Blackwood's bonded mate. Our bond is mutual, consensual, and legally recognized under pack law. We've filed the paperwork. That was a lie. The paperwork was still being drafted. But the elders didn't know that. The child Asher carries is our heir, heir to both the Ashford and Blackwood lines. We will raise them together, in a single household, with shared authority and shared responsibility. Any challenge to this arrangement will be treated as a challenge to both pacts simultaneously. The room erupted. I didn't hear most of it. Overlapping voices, angry shouts, a few incredulous laughs. Ronan's hand pressed more firmly against my back. Julian's expression didn't change. Then Elder Marlowe, the oldest, most influential member of the Ashford Council, stood. His voice cut through the noise like a blade. You expect us to accept this arrangement without question? An Omega who was disgraced, imprisoned, written off by his own family, now carrying an heir with two possible sires? This is absurd. This is an insult to every tradition our pacts are built on. Julian's smile didn't waver. Tradition is just peer pressure from dead people. I nearly choked. Ronan stepped forward, not dramatically, just enough to shift the focus. His voice was low, measured, and utterly without compromise. Tradition didn't protect our pacts from internal sabotage. Tradition didn't stop the conspiracy that almost destroyed Blackwood Holdings last quarter. Tradition didn't keep Julian's family from trying to ruin him. Asher did. Asher warned us. Asher saved us. And we will not let you use tradition as an excuse to destroy what we've built. The room went still. Elder Marlowe's face darkened. You're choosing him over your own blood. No, Julian said. We're choosing our family. And our family is standing right here. He reached for my hand. Ronan reached for the other. I stood between them, trembling, terrified, furious, and somehow, impossibly, not alone. The silence stretched. And then, from somewhere in the back, a single person started clapping. It was an Omega, young, female, her hand pressed over her heart. She looked at me with eyes that held no judgment, only recognition. I see you, she seemed to say. I see what this cost. Others joined her, slowly at first, then in a wave. Not everyone, but enough. Enough to break the tension. Enough to make the elders exchange uncomfortable glances. Elder Marlowe sat down. The battle wasn't over. I knew that. But for the first time, I believed we might win. The third trimester brought a new kind of chaos. My body had become unwieldy, unpredictable, and deeply inconvenient. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't get comfortable. I cried at a car commercial, which both Julian and Ronan found hilarious, and which I would deny to my dying breath. And then there was the nesting. I don't need $1,000 bassinet, I said for the 5th time. Julian looked genuinely wounded. It's handmade. By artisans. In Vermont. Vermont is not a selling point. The wood is sustainably sourced. The baby won't know the difference. The baby will appreciate quality. The baby, at that moment, kicked hard against my ribs. I winced. Julian immediately stopped arguing and rushed to my side, his hand on my stomach, his expression shifting from mock offense to genuine concern. Are you all right? Is it time? Should I call the doctor? It's not time. The baby is just opinionated. Like its father's. Julian's hand lingered. The baby kicked again, right against his palm. His breath caught. She knows me, he said softly. We don't know it's a she. She knows me. I didn't argue. Because watching Julian Ashford, elegant, dangerous, perpetually calculating Julian Ashford, melt every time he felt our child move was worth more than any argument. Ronan was different. He didn't gush. He didn't hover in obvious ways. But I caught him, more than once, standing in the doorway of the nursery we were slowly assembling, just watching. The crib, the mobile, the small pile of hand-knit blankets that Julian's staff had somehow acquired. What are you thinking? I asked one evening, leaning against the doorframe. Ronan didn't turn around. That I never imagined this. What? Fatherhood. That I'd have it with you. He paused. Both of you. The admission cost him something. I could see it in the tension of his shoulders, the stillness of his hands. I crossed the room and stood beside him. Neither did I. Liar. But there was no heat in it. You knew something. From the beginning. You knew things you shouldn't have known. I didn't deny it. I knew possibilities, not certainties. I knew that in one version of this story, we all ended up destroyed. I was trying to avoid that. And did you? I looked at the nursery, at the crib, the blankets, the small stuffed lion someone had left on the windowsill, at the future taking shape in soft colors and quiet moments. I think we're writing a new version, I said. One I never got to read. Ronan's hand found mine. His fingers intertwined with my own, warm, steady, certain. Then let's keep writing. The labor was long. 18 hours that blurred into a haze of pain, pressure, and the steady presence of two men who refused to leave my side. Julian held my hand. Ronan held the other. They argued about everything, whether the room was too cold, whether the doctor was competent, whether the birthing playlist should include classical music or something with a beat, but they never let go. You're crushing my fingers, I gasped between contractions. You're crushing mine, Julian shot back. His face was pale, his composure cracked. He looked terrified. Ronan looked no better. His jaw was set, his eyes too bright, his grip almost painfully tight. Neither of them looked away. The baby came at dawn. A cry, sharp, furious, impossibly loud, cut through the room. The doctor placed the small, squirming bundle on my chest, and I looked down at a face that was somehow both familiar and entirely new. Dark hair, like Julian's. A stubborn chin, like Ronan's. And eyes, gray, unfocused, blinking at the world with the indignant fury of someone who had just been evicted from a very comfortable home. She's here, Julian whispered. He was crying. Ronan was crying too, though he was trying very hard to hide it. I looked at both of them, at the two men who were supposed to destroy me, who had instead become my home, and felt something crack open in my chest. She's here, I agreed. And she's perfect. We named her Liana. It wasn't a pack name, or a family name, or a name with any political significance. It was just a name we all liked, soft, strong, something that felt like a beginning. Liana Vance Blackwood Ashford, according to the birth certificate that took 3 lawyers and a notary to finalize. The hyphen situation was, apparently, unprecedented. She's going to hate us for this when she learns to write, I said, watching her sleep. She's going to hate us for many things, Julian said, not looking up from his phone. This will be low on the list. Ronan was holding her. He had been holding her for the past 2 hours, through 3 feedings and a diaper change, and showed no signs of stopping. His expression, normally unreadable, carefully controlled, was completely open, vulnerable, awed. She has your nose, he said to me. She has your inability to sleep through the night. She has Julian's lung capacity. Julian looked up, offended. My lung capacity is exquisite. The baby stirred. Ronan's arms tightened instinctively. Not too hard, just enough. She settled. I leaned back against the pillows, exhausted and aching and fuller than I had ever been. This wasn't the ending I had expected when I woke up in Asher Vance's body, trapped in a story I thought I knew. This wasn't safety or simplicity or any of the things I had tried so hard to find. But it was ours. And that, I was finally learning, was enough. Liana was 6 months old when the first reporter managed to get a photo. It wasn't a good photo, blurry, taken from too far away, with Julian's hand partially covering the baby's face. But it was enough. The gossip columns exploded. The heir apparent, one headline screamed. 3 fathers, 1 baby. Inside the most controversial bonding in pack history. I didn't read the articles. Julian did, mostly to find out which journalists to blacklist. Ronan did, mostly to find out which journalists to threaten. I spent my time on more important things, like teaching Liana that not everything needed to be put in her mouth. The baby disagreed. Vigorously. The pack councils eventually accepted the situation. Not because they approved, most of them didn't, but because Julian and Ronan had made it impossible to challenge without tearing the packs apart. And neither pack was willing to tear itself apart over one Omega and his inconvenient child. Cowards, Julian called them. Practical, Ronan corrected. I called them exhausted. Because keeping this fragile peace required constant negotiation, constant vigilance, constant effort from all three of us. But it was worth it. Every morning, I woke up between them, Julian warm and possessive on one side, Ronan solid and steady on the other. Every morning, I looked at Liana's sleeping face and felt something shift in my chest, something that might have been joy or terror or love so big it had no other shape. Every morning, I chose to stay. One night, when Liana was asleep and the city was quiet, I stood on the balcony of our penthouse and looked out at the lights. Julian joined me first, a glass of wine in his hand, non-alcoholic, because I was still nursing, and he was annoyingly responsible about things that mattered. Thinking about running? He asked. Always. And yet, I leaned into him. He wrapped an arm around my waist. Ronan appeared a moment later, Liana's monitor in his hand. He didn't say anything, just stood on my other side, close enough to feel. The three of us looked out at the city, at the lights, the mountains, the vast, indifferent world beyond the glass. I never wanted this, I said quietly. Wanted what? Ronan asked. Any of it. The pregnancy. The bonding. The two of you circling me like I was something worth catching. I paused, but I'm glad I got it. Julian's arm tightened. Sentimentality doesn't suit you. Shut up. Ronan's hand found mine. He's right, though. You're terrible at admitting when you're happy. I'm not happy. I'm exhausted. There's a difference. Julian laughed, soft, real. Liar. I didn't argue, because standing there, between them, with our daughters sleeping inside and the city spread out at our feet, I was, against all odds and better judgment, exactly where I was supposed to be. The story I had woken up in was wrong about almost everything. The villain wasn't a villain. The Omega wasn't an Omega. The ending wasn't an ending at all, just a beginning I never saw coming. And for the first time since I arrived in this world, I stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. I just let myself be.